الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين وسلم تسليما كثيرا أما بعد. The month of Ramadan has ended, and while all of us throughout this ummah are rejoicing now after our Eid, many of you may feel a bit of sadness that Ramadan has passed. And it's only natural for those of us who have experienced the holiness of that month and tasted the sweetness of serving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the bliss of being near to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala and to His word. It's only natural for those to wish that they could relive Ramadan and to feel a bit of grief that the honor and the blessing of the month of Ramadan is no longer with us. But we should remember that the doors to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are always wide open. And there are many lessons we can learn from the month of Ramadan. And many habits we can pick up in that month and take them with us to the rest of the year. One of the most important lessons we learn from Ramadan, one of the most important habits we pick up in the month of Ramadan is the habit of reciting the Quran, of reading and studying and thinking about the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Most of us spent a significant amount of time during Ramadan reading or listening to the Quran. Many of us read the entire Quran. Many of us may have read the entire Quran more than one time. But we should remember that the reason we observe the fast in this month of Ramadan is that we are commemorating the blessing and the honor of having the Quran with us for the rest of our lives. And every Muslim should have a regular habit of reading the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Sahaba, the students, the followers of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when we read about what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught them, we learn that there was a regular habit of most of them to have a regular portion or section of the Quran they would read every day. Some of them would finish reading the entire Quran every week, every 7 days. Some of them would read the entire Quran every 40 days, every 30 days, or more or less. We see this sometimes when we read about the Sahaba. We see that some of them, this was so ingrained in them, that when they were talking about judging periods of time, because they didn't have watches or clocks like we do where we have minutes and seconds, they would pick an activity that was common to everybody did, and they would say, oh, this such and such, it takes about as long as this other activity does. So before Islam, and even after Islam, some of them would say, this takes as long as it would take to milk a camel, for example. So we see after Islam, reading the Quran was such an ingrained habit in them that some of them would say, this period took as long as it would take to read 50 or 60 ayahs. We see that was such an ingrained part of their everyday life, reading the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every one of us, if we can't read the entire Quran every week or even every 40 days, should never go one day without at least reading one ayah from the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whatever is easy, whatever is manageable for us, whatever we can be consistent in. And we should remember that when we approach the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed His words to be understood and to be contemplated and to be a lesson for us. We shouldn't just read the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like an incantation. We should, before we sit down with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we should think, how is this book going to change me? How are these words going to change me? How am I going to be uplifted? How am I going to be admonished? And after we sit down with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we should stand up a changed and a different person than the one who sat down. Another habit that we can learn from Ramadan, that we can pick up in this month, is the habit of praying during the night. This is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised some of His servants for. Throughout the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praised His servants who He describes, تَتَجَافَى جُنُوبُهُمْ عَنِ الْمَضَاجِعِ يَدْعُونَ رَبَّهُمْ خَوْفًا وَطَمَعًا. Those whose sides forsake their beds in order to call on their Lord out of hope and fear. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes some people, يَتْلُونَ آيَاتِ اللَّهِ آنَاءَ اللَّيْلِ وَهُمْ يَسْجُدُونَ. They recite the words of God throughout the night and they bow down in prayer. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes some people, وَبِالْأَسْحَارِ هُمْ يَسْتَغْفِرُونَ. And in the early hours before dawn, they beg for forgiveness. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam taught us in a hadith in Sahih Muslim, أفضل الصلاة بعد المكتوبة صلاة الليل. The best, most virtuous prayers after the obligatory prayers, after the 5 obligatory prayers, are the night prayers. And especially in the last hour of the night. The hour when everybody else is asleep, everything is quiet, you are alone. At that time, when you are alone, there's no one but you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At that time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes closer to you. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam told us in a hadith in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim, ينزل ربنا تبارك وتعالى كل ليلة إلى السماء الدنيا حين يبقى ثلث الليل الآخر. Our Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala comes down every night when the last third of the night remains. And He says, من يدعوني فأستجيب له من يسألني فأعطيه من يستغفرني فأغفر له. Who is calling on me, I will answer him. Who is asking me, I will give him. Who is seeking my forgiveness, I will forgive him. If we can't stand up in the middle of the night, the last hours of the night, one habit that we should try as hard as we can to be consistent, at the very least, is praying Salat al-Witr. And Salat al-Witr is, at the minimum, only one rak'ah. Only one rak'ah. The Prophet ﷺ told us in a hadith in Sahih Muslim, من خاف ألا يقوم من آخر الليل فليوتر أولا ومن طمع أن يقوم آخره فليوتر آخره فإن صلاة آخر الليل مشهودة وذلك أفضل. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever is worried that he won't be able to wake up in the last part of the night, he should make sure that he makes witr in the beginning of the night, before he sleeps. And whoever expects that he will be able to wake up in the last hours of the night, before Fajr, he should make witr at that time. Because prayers during the last hours of the night are attended, are witnessed, and that is better. Another lesson we take from Ramadan, another habit we gain from this month, is the habit of staying close to the houses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and frequenting the masajid devoted to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, where His light is always shining. We spent long parts of our night during the Ramadan in the masjid, and we should remember that the Prophet ﷺ taught us. He said, بَشِّرِ الْمَشَّائِينَ فِي الظُّلَمِ إِلَى الْمَسَاجِدِ بِالنُّورِ التَّامِ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ. In a hadith in Abu Dawood, and maybe the Prophet ﷺ said it, taught us, give glad tidings to those who frequently walk back and forth to the masajid in the dark throughout the year, that they will have a complete, perfect light on the day of resurrection. Another obvious habit that we can learn from the month of Ramadan is fasting. This door to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is open to us throughout the year. The Prophet ﷺ told us in a hadith in Sahih Bukhari, إِنَّ فِي الْجَنَّةِ بَابًا يُقَالُ لَهُ الرَّيَّانِ. the Prophet ﷺ said, in paradise, there's one of the gates to paradise is called Ar-Rayyan. And the word Ar-Rayyan means the one whose thirst has been quenched. The Prophet ﷺ said that this gate, يَدْخُلُ مِنْهُ الصَّائِمُونَ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ لَا يَدْخُلُ مِنْهُ أَحَدٌ غَيْرُهُمْ. This gate, only the people who used to fast in this life will enter through this gate. No one else will be allowed to enter through that gate. يُقَالُ أَيْنَ الصَّائِمُونَ فَيَقُومُونَ لَا يَدْخُلُ مِنْهُ أَحَدٌ غَيْرُهُمْ. They will be honored. And the Prophet ﷺ said, they will be called out. Where are the people who used to fast? They will stand up and enter through that gate. No one else will enter through it. فَإِذَا دَخَلُوا أُغْلِقَ فَلَمْ يَدْخُلْ مِنْهُ أَحَدٌ. Once they have entered, it will be sealed off and no one else will go through that gate. After Ramadan, if we can make it a regular habit to fast 1 day a month, 1 day a week, every Monday, every Thursday, every Monday and Thursday, 3 days a month, whenever it's easy for us, perhaps in the middle of the month, the 3 days after the full moon in the middle of the month, or even 1 day a month, this is a wonderful habit. And this is something that the Prophet ﷺ encouraged some of the Sahaba to do in a hadith in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim. Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu told us that the Prophet ﷺ advised him to do 3 things, to have 3 habits, 3 extra things. And Abu Hurairah said, these 3 things, I have done them ever since he gave me that advice, and I will continue to do them until I die. And Sahih Bukhari and Muslim, Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu said, أوصاني خليلي صلى الله عليه وسلم بثلاث لا أدعهن حتى أموت. Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu said, my best friend sallallahu alayhi wasallam advised me to do 3 things, and I will never stop doing them until the day I die. What were those 3 things? He said, rak'atay al-duha, praying 2 rak'ahs in the early morning after sunrise, salat al-duha. And they say in the commentary on this hadith that Abu Hurairah wasn't able to pray and qiyam al-layl, or in the last part of the night, what we know as tahajjud. The Prophet ﷺ said, instead of that, make it a regular habit to pray salat al-duha. That's the first thing. The second thing was, he said, وَبِصِيَامِ ثَلَاثَةِ أَيَّامٍ كُلِّ شَهْرٍ, and to fast 3 days out of each month. And the third thing was وَأَنْ أُوتِرَ قَبْلَ أَنْ أَنَامٍ, and that I make sure to pray witr before falling asleep. One particular extra fast that the Prophet ﷺ encouraged us to do is during this month, the month of Shawwal. The Prophet ﷺ said, مَنْ صَامَ رَمَضَانَ ثُمَّ أَتْبَعَهُ سِتًّا مِنْ شَوَّالٍ كَانَ كَصِيَامِ الدَّهْرِ. The Prophet ﷺ said, whoever fasts the month of Ramadan and then fasts 6 days during the next month, that is the month of Shawwal, the month that we are in. Today is the 2nd day of the month of Shawwal. Whoever fasts the month of Ramadan and then fasts 6 days during the month of Shawwal, it's as if he has fasted for all of his life. And they say, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, مَنْ جَاءَ بِالْحَسَنَةِ فَلَهُ عَشْرُ أَمْثَالِهَا. Whoever offers a good deed will have it multiplied by 10. If you fast Ramadan, which is often 30 days, that's 300. And if you fast 6 days from Shawwal, multiplied by 10, that's 60. And the Muslim year is 360 days. So if you fast the month of Ramadan and fast 6 days in Shawwal, it's as if you have fasted the entire year. One of the prayers that the Prophet ﷺ used to make was that he used to say, وَاجْعَلْ الْحَيَاةَ زِيَادَةً لِي فِي كُلِّ خَيْرٍ. He used to ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make his life a constant increase in every good thing. Make my life an increase in every good, in every virtue. a believer always hopes to increase in good things. He always hopes to grow in understanding, in knowledge, in faith, in virtue. But if someone is able to be consistent, even if they're doing little things, we should remember that the Prophet ﷺ taught us, أَحَبُّ الْأَعْمَالِ إِلَى اللَّهِ أَدْوَمُهَا وَإِنْ قَلَّ. If a person is able to be consistent and regular in doing even small good deeds, small acts of virtue throughout his life, this is truly a great thing. And the most beloved deeds to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are those that are consistent, even if they are small, even if we think that they are small. But we should remember that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put barakah in good things, in good words and good actions. And if you commit yourself to doing a small act of goodness, and you commit yourself to being consistent in it, you shouldn't be surprised if you find yourself irresistibly drawn to an increase. Or if you find that more comes to you in ways you didn't expect, and in ways you couldn't have imagined before. بارك الله لي ولكم في القرآن العظيم ونفعني وإياكم بما فيه من الآيات والذكر الحكيم. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله العظيم الجليل لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين من كل ذنب فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. اللهم لك الحمد حمدا كثيرا طيبا مباركا فيه مباركا عليه كما يحب ربنا ويرضى. ولك الحمد ملء السماوات وملء الأرض وملء ما بينهما وملء ما شئت من شيء بعد. ولك الحمد كما ينبغي لجلال وجهك وعظيم سلطانك. ولك الحمد حتى ترضى ولك الحمد إذا رضيت ولك الحمد بعد الرضا. سبحانك لا نحصي ثناء عليك أنت كما أثنيت على نفسك. وصل اللهم وسلم وبارك وزد وأنعم على عبدك ورسولك نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه الذين عزروه ونصروه واتبعوا النور الذي أنزل معه وعنا معهم بمنك وكرمك يا أكرم الأكرمين. ثم أما بعد. A common question that people have after the month of Ramadan is that if I have days to make up for Ramadan, if I was sick or traveling and I didn't fast some days, and I have to make up some days after the month of Ramadan, and I want to fast those 6 days from Shawwal, or I want to fast the day of Arafah, or the day of Ashura, for example, do I have to make up the missed fast from Ramadan first, or can I fast those other days? The simple answer is that the best thing to do, if you're able to, the best thing to do is to make up Ramadan first and then fast the extra fast. There's no debate about that. There's no confusion in that. Especially the 6 days from Shawwal, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man sama Ramadan, thumma atba'ahu sittan min Shawwal." Whoever fasts Ramadan, then follows it up with 6 days from Shawwal. If you want to apply those words and exactly as the Prophet ﷺ said them, the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever fasts the month of Ramadan and then follows it up with 6 days from Shawwal. If you want to apply that literally, you would fast Ramadan and make up any fast that you missed and then follow that with 6 days from Shawwal. That's the best thing to do. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Baqarah, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave us the option of breaking our fast if we have an excuse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, whoever breaks his fast, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَعِدَّةٌ مِنْ أَيَّامٍ أُخَرٍ. He should fast a number of other days. And he didn't say immediately or consecutively or in a specific order. So the rest of the year is open to you. You have until next Ramadan. So if you do choose to fast, especially a specific day that may you may miss, like the day of Arafah or the day of Ashura, if you do fast that day before making up the fast you missed from Ramadan, there's nothing to make that unacceptable, and there's nothing to make that invalid, inshallah. اللهم صل وسلم على نبينا محمد اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد وبارك على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت وباركت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب. ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار. اللهم أصلح لنا ديننا الذي هو عصمة أمرنا، وأصلح لنا دنيانا التي فيها معاشنا، وأصلح لنا آخرتنا التي فيها معادنا، واجعل الحياة زيادة لنا في كل خير، واجعل الموت راحة لنا من كل شر. اللهم رحمتك نرجو فلا تكلنا إلى أنفسنا طرفة عين، وأصلح لنا شؤوننا كلها، لا إله إلا أنت. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح. قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله.
Just make sure your rows are straight. You're in a straight line. Come close together. Don't leave any gaps between each other. Make sure the row in front of you is complete before you start a new row. Allah Akbar. Allah.